Hello and bonjour! Now, if you've watched my videos before, you know that we don't mind exploring an abandoned place or visiting a weird railway on this channel. But with Valentine's Day just around the corner, I thought I'd show you that I can be romantic too. So I've brought you all to Paris to see an abandoned railway. At the dawn of the 1900s, this line was carrying 30 million passengers a year. But in 1934, its stations closed their doors forever. So what happened? Why was it abandoned? And why do the tracks seem to have been kept in such good condition? Welcome to Paris's lost railway, La Petite Ceinture. This is the old station at Boulevard d'Ornano in the north of Paris. It was one of 30 passenger stations that once served the Chemin de Fer de Petite Ceinture, which literally translates as the Little Belt Railway, a disused line that ran in a 32-kilometre ring all the way around the city. The building is now a cafe called La Recyclerie, and it's full of boho chic Parisian ladies and the annoying kind of man who's got a beard, a check shirt and a laptop so he can work remotely on his stupid job in online media. So I'm going to fit right in. The idea of building a circular railway line around Paris dates all the way back to the 1840s and the very beginning of railways in France. This 1846 map of the city shows new terminus stations springing up at Saint-Lazare, Gare du Nord, the Gare d'Austerlitz, which back then was called the Gare d'Orléans, Denfert-Rochereau and Montparnasse. They would soon be joined by the Gare de l'Est, then called the Gare de Strasbourg, and the Gare de Lyon. The problem was that they were built by 5 different railway companies, and because each company was worried about protecting their regional monopolies, they were running 5 completely separate and unconnected networks. Everyone could see that this needed fixing urgently, even if you were a French politician, and the government decided that it would be a good idea to build a circular railway to link the networks up. The plan had military backing too. The army thought it would be a great way of transporting troops and equipment around the 32-kilometre ring of walls and defensive fortifications that they had just finished building. And actually it would have been quite useful when they were building it. And by 1860, a mere 15 years later, the companies had got as far as building a line halfway round the city. It was enough to connect 5 of the major stations and transfer freight between the 5 networks, and they were pretty much happy to leave it at that. Meanwhile, one of the companies, the Chemin de Fer de l'Ouest, had started France's first suburban passenger service with a line down to Auteuil, a lovely leafy area to the southwest, which coincidentally was the same place that a lot of rich Parisians had bought second homes. Between them, the freight line and the passenger line ran 3/4 of the way around the edge of Paris. And at this point, the companies came under a lot of pressure from the French government, who were quite keen to hurry up and complete the circle in time to carry passengers to the Universal Exhibition of 1867 that they were about to organise. In the space of a few years, hastily constructed passenger stations were opened on the former freight line, the passenger line was adapted for use by freight trains, and a new section connected Auteuil to the Gare d'Orléans across the south. The whole thing opened in February 1867, just in time for the exhibition, although the circle wasn't quite fully completed until 1869, when a short tunnel provided the final missing link. In the meantime, Paris itself had been busy growing and spreading out, and what had originally been planned as a freight line in the countryside was now a passenger line on the edge of the city. 5 million passengers in 1880 became 17 million in 1890 and 38 million in 1900. Boosted by another Universal Exhibition that year. By this stage, the line had become so busy that most of the freight trains had been shunted out onto a new circle further out, which was predictably called the Grande Ceinture, or the Big Belt Line. But something else happened in 1900, the opening of the first Paris Metro line. The creation of an east-west link directly through the centre of the city started to relieve some of the traffic from the Petite Ceinture, and as more and more metro lines were added over the next few years, more and more passengers switched over. By 1910, the service on the Petite Ceinture was cut from 8 trains an hour to 4, and by the 1920s, passenger numbers had dropped back down under 10 million a year. The Petite Ceinture was effectively a victim of its own success. It had proved that there was massive demand for a metro system, and then lost most of its traffic to it. Eventually, the government pulled the plug, and on the 1st of April 1934, the stations were closed to passengers for the final time. The trains were replaced by 3 bus lines running parallel to the old tracks, although a tiny part of the Petite Ceinture lived on in the route numbers that these were given, the PC1, PC2 and PC3. For the next half a century, the railway passed into a kind of purgatory. semi-abandoned but still used by freight trains and the occasional empty passenger train that needed to be transferred from one place to another. Parts of the line were gradually shut down in the 80s and 90s, but it wasn't until the early 2000s that the very final section was closed. Despite its potentially huge redevelopment value, the land was sealed off and the tracks were left in place, just in case they might be needed again one day. And as the old railway began silently collecting weeds, rubbish, and a few adventurous pieces of graffiti, it became quite a weird place, simultaneously in the middle of the city and completely removed from it. Of course, you can't really have a 32-kilometre corridor of unused space in the heart of Paris without a whole load of people coming along and arguing about what you should do with it. Because the land is still owned by the railway, the city doesn't actually have any direct power, but in some areas the two sides are working together to give it back to the public as a green space. In the last 10 years, several sections have been opened up and you can now explore them perfectly legally. But don't worry, there are still plenty of parts that are officially off limits if you prefer to explore illegally. So what would the Petite Ceinture look like today if it had survived? Well, probably something like this. In fact, probably exactly like this. The old station at Avenue Henri Martin was reopened in the 1980s when an extension to Line C of the suburban network, the RER, brought trains running through here again. And in fact, for 5 stops between here and Porte de Clichy, you're travelling on the Petite Ceinture route through Petite Ceinture stations. But could a passenger service ever return to the rest of the line? Well, half the station buildings have now been lost to history, and some of the infrastructure could use a lick of paint, but the track is still there, the route has been kept safe from development, and Paris isn't getting any less crowded. If the metro becomes more congested over the next few decades, it's not unthinkable that the same system that killed off the Petite Ceinture in the 1930s could also be responsible for bringing it back to life. If you'd like to take a romantic trip along the Petite Ceinture, the best legal places to do so are in the southern parts of the city. I recommend the elevated section between Ballard and Porte de Versailles, or the woodland section between Auteuil and La Muette. Both of these are about 1.5 kilometres long and they're fully wheelchair accessible, although the woodland one might be a bit dodgy in wet weather. If you're watching this video in the future, then it's possible that they've now opened up more sections, and it's also possible you'll get flattened by a train. Either way, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you soon.